Okay, so if you've ever asked the question of whether or not you can cycle sync with a team, this is going to be the episode for you. It is a question that I get asked a lot, actually, is whether or not you can actually cycle sync when you're working with a team. And it makes total sense that you'd be able to cycle sync when it's just you and you're in full control of your business and you're the only one doing anything, that you could match up your stuff around your own cycle. But what if there's other people? What if there's other people on your team that maybe have conflicting cycles? Their cycles don't match up at the same time as yours. Or maybe you have a whole bunch of people on your team and everybody has a different cycle and everything's a little bit erratic. Then what, right? Does it make it possible for us to actually use our cycle when we're operating in that team environment? And so whether or not you have a big team, if you have a few people, if you have just like a VA, have a couple of assistants, like whatever that looks like, this episode is really going to dive into that, because I think one of the misconceptions or the beliefs or the thoughts or things that comes up when this question is asked of me is kind of this assumption, and I hear it in the language that they use and the way they ask the question, is this assumption that by using your cycle, it makes you more erratic, maybe is a good word for it, more spontaneous, a little bit more impulsive, makes it a little bit more challenging to actually work with other people. And while yes, I am a little bit impulsive and I'm a little bit erratic with my work, and sometimes I change gears and I make quick decisions, and I make this in the sense of I'm more of a person that takes quick action rather than necessarily my cycle. But my team probably gets frustrated with it nonetheless. But I don't think it's the cycle that actually makes you erratic. It's not the cycle that makes you spontaneous or impulsive or makes it challenging for your team to work with. In fact, I think it's kind of the opposite of that. When you actually know what your cycle is and what the schedule is going to be and the tasks that you need to get done, and you've done what I have my clients do and like break down a task analysis and really look at all the components of what you need to get done, and you map that out with your cycle, it actually makes you much more proactive. It makes you much more efficient with your work. It makes it easier to delegate to your team. It gives your team ample amounts of time to actually get something done, right? What happens is that if you're not doing that and you're operating in this like quick paced, like, I just got to get this done, like this is the to-do list, I need to get it done next week, and you pass that off to your teammate, that puts pressure on your teammate to actually get something done. Versus for me, like, let's just look at the podcasting, like right now, like take this as an example. When I podcast, I sit down and I try to get a bunch of my podcast episodes done at one time so that I can send that over to my team. They have ample amounts of time to get that done within whatever constraints work for their life. It might be their cycles they're using. It might not be a cycle, right? Like if you don't have teammates on your team, like maybe not everybody's bleeding and operating in their cycle. That's possible too. But like one of the core values of my business is to be able to operate with more balance and to be able to show up for my life and to do the things I want to do in my life. And so that doesn't look like me doing that and then passing all the pressure off onto my team. I want my team to be able to operate in that same way. I want my business and my work for them to be able to empower them to also live the life that they want and also live with this balance and this ease and like work within whatever zones work for them. So for me to operate more in a monthly rhythm gives me like, this is where I'm at right now. I'm recording these podcast episodes. I'm going to get them ready. I'm going to send them over to them. And then they have a month essentially to get most of them out. It depends. Like this episode actually probably will come out in like 2 weeks, but then they still at least have 2 weeks to work on this episode. And so when you actually operate with your cycle, it puts you into a place of planning much further out because you want to make sure that things fall in the best places for you. So when you look at a big task like a launch, it's like looking at that whole big launch, looking at all the pieces, all the components that need to be done. And if you want to make sure that you're in the zone of when you're at the peak for recording it or recording an ad or creating sales copy or whatever you're doing, you might have to back it out a little bit further. And so what I have found is that actually using your cycle in your business actually makes you more proactive. I'm planning my things out a year in advance. It's like a real rough schedule a year in advance. And then every quarter, I look at the next quarter ahead and I go deeper in that quarter. And then every single month, I'm reviewing and then extending out that review. And so it's kind of my business doesn't ever stick. Like it's not this rigid schedule, like things are exactly the same. I love the fluidity of things to be able to change and to adjust and accommodate with where my intuition is telling me to go. And sometimes, like when we plan a year in advance, we don't always have all of the data. We don't have all of the knowledge. We don't have all of the experience. And so I give myself a lot of flexibility in that. But I also want to be really mindful of my team and how I'm supporting them to be able to do that too, and to be able to give them as much advance notice. And by using your cycle and planning with your seasons, it really does allow you to do that. Now, the other piece of this that I really want to highlight is that just because we're cycle syncing does not mean that you can't do things in other phases of the cycle. You can do anything at any point in time. Like who you are and how you show up is just a little bit different. So for me right now, I'm recording this. Like I typically record podcast episodes when I'm in that late, like ovulatory phase into my reflect phase. And so it's like I have that juiciness of my reflect phase and the emotions of it, but I also have a little bit more of the on-camera stuff. But this one I'm not. And I actually haven't recorded a lot of video podcasts it's been a long time since I've done a video podcast. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. Screw it. Like, I don't care that my makeup's not done. I don't care that my hair is wet in a messy bun because I just did a workout and I put it up in a messy bun right after a workout. Like, I'm just going to do it. And I'm going to show up for you and show up real and authentic and not feel like it has to be this pressure. But that being said, I am recording this that's a little bit out of alignment for me to be on camera. To record just an audio podcast, this would be totally fine. But being on camera and the fact that I'm like 10 days out from a head cold and like still recovering, you could probably hear it in my voice a little bit. It's not my ideal to be here on video and on audio and recording. Doesn't mean I can't do it. No, heck no. Like you can do it at any time. Maybe my energy's not at the greatest, and that's okay. That's okay. So when working with a team, that's a really valuable thing to remember is that it doesn't always have to be exactly where. But when we know where you are and we know where your teammates are, and we have this communication amongst our team about where we are, it can drastically change and shape the communication that we have. So how we communicate, how we show up, our expectations of them, our decision-making, like all of those things can shift and change based on the knowledge of where we are in our cycles. So that's what we're going to highlight in this next little bit. Okay. So we're going to dive into each one of the different phases and kind of highlight a little bit about how you can lead and how you can communicate in each one of those different phases so that you are the most effective leader for your team and also can understand and have this empathy of knowing where your teammates are coming from when they're in each of those different phases too, because you might be conflicting. Right? Your teammate may be in this place of ready to communicate and wanting to be all in and brainstorm and get tons of ideas on. And you might be like, I just want to hide into the back corner and I don't want to do any of it. And so the knowledge of this allows you to be able to communicate more effectively to each other and to be able to create systems that are going to be unique to you and your team, right? Like every team is different. And the expectation that all of our teams are going to operate with the same model, the same style, the same everything is ludicrous. Like it's just not going to happen. But being able to work together and have this open communication among your team about where you guys are at so that you can help support each other in this communication. So in that, let's talk about each one of these different phases and how we can really use each one of the different phases and different methods of communication in that to really help support more cohesive teammate playing or team player or team, I don't know, whatever the word is, like team communication, right? So in that menstrual phase of your cycle, it's that time of recharging, right? That time of retreating. It's that time of pulling back. It's the time of you being able to be very introspective and reflective. And so thinking about that in terms of how you communicate, right? It's a little bit more, I might be just brainstorming some ideas and coming up with some ideas, but it's a little bit more reflective, not necessarily like, let's take action on this. So it's very important as a team leader that you make that distinction very clear. That when you communicate with somebody, that you communicate to them like, hey, I'm just in this like reflective sort of processing sort of thing. Like I am a vertical processor. I actually sent a message to a friend of mine this morning on Voxer, and I told her, I was like, hey, I'm just going to send this message to you via Voxer because I just need to process it. Like I just need to get it out of my head and I need to talk it out, but I don't necessarily need you to respond with an answer. Like this is the part of me. Like I just need to be able to communicate it to somebody and like help me find the answer for myself. And so having that knowledge with your team can help too, because like I know for my teammate, if I tell her I need something done, she does it, right? She like takes action on it. And then sometimes I'll come back, I'm like, well, we didn't really need to do that right then or that way, or like I really was still kind of processing. So it's really helpful to have that distinction of like, this is where I'm at right now. I'm just kind of reflecting. I'm just kind of trying to create some ideas. And then also allowing your teammates to be able to do that too. Allowing your teammates to be able to have that time and that space and like know that there's going to be times of their month where they may need to go off the grid. They may need to be able to tune out and turn off. And that's okay too. For me as a business owner, like that is one of my core things. Like as I hire on more people, I want them to all feel empowered to be able to take time off and to be able to create that space specifically around their cycle, but more so just around their family and around the things that they need in their life, right? We have this cultural expectation that we have to work, like a regular 9 to 5 job. You get like 2 weeks of vacation in the United States. And it's like, that's ludicrous. Like we should be taking way more time for that. And I really want to help set the stage for that. So this is one area that you can make aware to your team that that's what you want to do. So the other piece of this is that in communication, looking at how you communicate and how you connect with them is one of those phases, right? Where you don't necessarily want to be on camera and doing this big event and this big training or whatever. It might be more just one-to-one conversations. It might look like using Slack. It might look like writing your communications through ClickUp, which is what I use. Like it might look like emails. It might look like doing a lot more of the work and the communication processing time, not on camera or not in these like calls. So looking at how you structure your team collaborations, maybe you don't do a weekly check-in. Maybe you take a week off, or maybe that week you are, right? We're talking about like taking a week off. But if you are working, maybe you're sending emails or connecting just through email chat or like a text thread some way, right? It's not being on camera the whole time. Now, in that follicular phase, you are going to feel like that energy is rising. You're going to feel super great. You're going to feel ready to get things going. You're going to ready feel get things moving. And so holding more almost like team meetings where you get together and you collaborate and brainstorm, and all of those can be really effective to be able to like get in the same room, virtually or not, and to be able to kind of bounce ideas off each other, to create that community, to create that engagement, to be able to articulate with each other, and also being mindful of the ones on your team that might not be in that phase. And that's okay too, but allowing them to still be there and allow them to be a part of the space, but not holding an expectation that they're going to participate in some way or form, right? Like use each one of these strengths for each person and then allow each person to kind of feel into wherever they are in those phases. Now, the last one is your luteal phase, right? This is where energy is starting to decline. You're tapping more into those details. You're tapping more into the behind the scenes type of stuff. And so going back to that same kind of energy of the recharge phase, you might want to be communicating things through email or one-to-one, or really honing in and doing some more of that, like, is everything going the right way? Is it clear? Is it getting done? Like dotting your T's, crossing your I's. So this might be a really great place for you to be able to pull in some of those like constructive criticism type of things to help support your teammates and to, know how do I communicate with them? One of my favorites, and I actually was talking to a client recently about this, we were talking about when we give feedback, right? Like sandwiching it together. And this is communication 101 that you can use with anybody. It is not just meant for just your teammates, but where you give a constructive feedback sort of thing, like you did such a great job on XYZ. I really appreciated that. then you give your constructive feedback, and then you give another positive thing on the other end. So the constructive piece is sandwiched right in the middle of two positive things. It's going to help your teammate feel a little bit more valued and positive. It's going to start it on a positive note, which takes down their like walls, like defensive walls. And then when you give it to them in a little bit of a constructive way, and then you followed up with another thing that they did really well. I sometimes do this with my husband all the time too. It's like, hey, I really appreciated when you took the trash out yesterday. That was so helpful for me. I would love if you could actually help me with the dishes. Like the dishes not being put from the sink to the dishwasher is really a heavy burden on me. And then I appreciate that you helped get the kids to school yesterday, right? So you're like, I'm showing something that I need help with, or I need support with, or something that there's a way he can help me. But I've sandwiched it with two things in which I like, hey, you've already done a really great job with these things. This strategy, this like sandwich strategy in your communication can be everything when you're working with a team, regardless of what phase you're in or not. Okay, so that's kind of like an overarching view of like how your communication can change throughout the month and how your cycle really impacts how you communicate with your team. The other really big thing that I want to kind of highlight here is in that sense of decision making and having the awareness of the fact that your decision making changes throughout the month. And we have an earlier episode geared just towards decision making. So we'll make sure to have that linked up in the show notes for you so that you can go back and listen to that episode, because how your blood flow changes and how your brain changes throughout the month does make you much more likely to make decisions, and ones when you're a little bit more impulsive with your decisions. So right now I'm in that reflect phase, and I've been feeling some pretty heavy emotions around some stuff in my business. And I was like, oh my gosh, screw it. I'm going to throw this all up in the air and I'm going to start over. Like, this isn't working. This isn't working. I don't want to do this anymore. And then I had to remind myself, I'm like, okay, you're in your reflect phase. Don't make any crazy, irrational decisions right now, because things might change in a week or two from now. So rather than feeling like I need to shift and change those emotions or change those decisions or change those actions, I'm just going to sit with it and I'm going to allow it to be here. And then I'm not going to make any big decisions till down the road. Now, the reason I bring this up in this episode about the team is because when you're working with a team, and you're delegating things to them, you're taking things off of your plate and passing it off to them to do, you really want to be sure that when you make a decision, that decision is actually how you're going to want them to carry forward. Because it's the worst to tell your team that they're going to do one thing and then change it on them, right? It's one thing to be like, okay, I want you to do X, Y, Z, and then a week or two later, change it on them. And there is going to be some pieces of that, right? Like I know both my teammates that are listening to this, I see you and I understand that I do that. I do change things on them, but I also am working a lot in my own space of like how I work as a leader in being more like, how can we create systems and how can we create processes that's not me just reacting to like what my decision is on the whim. And so knowing that I have a team, I want to be much more strategic with my decisions. I want to be much more strategic about what I'm delegating. I want to create systems. I want to create processes. I want to create workflows so that everybody's on the same page, that I'm communicating effectively, we're keeping consistent, and then it helps them do their job better. It's not me just randomly deciding, like, because I'm in my reflect phase and I'm feeling so overwhelmed with all these things that I want to just like throw it all up in the air. And then now I'm going to go to them and say like, okay, screw it. We're not doing any of this. And then in a week or two, like to change my mind and now we're going to do it again. Like that's not helpful. So I think one, understanding how you make decisions and how your brain changes throughout the month and how your cycle impacts you can make you such a better leader in terms of making decisions and being able to delegate and pass that off to your team. And then lastly, this episode's gotten a little bit longer than I anticipated. I have like a ton more notes here of what I actually want to share with you. And I'm going to have to probably save that for another episode. But I do want to really bring in the conversation around self-care as a leader, because to become and to be an effective leader of your team, you have to be taking care of you. You have to have your own self-awareness of what your needs are, what's happening with you. Like going back to that idea of like the impulsive decision-making and reactiveness and being spontaneous and like and requiring your team to kind of ride with that, like that's not being a very effective leader. And when your nervous system is totally dysregulated and you're feeling very overwhelmed or you're not in tune with your cycle, right? When you have no idea what that's going on in your hormones or how your cycle's impacting you throughout the month, it's actually creating less self-awareness. And then therefore you're not showing up as the most effective leader you could be, and having the awareness of how you need to take care of yourself in each one of those different phases. And so each one of those different phases, you as a leader need to know, what do you need? What does your body need? How do you need to take care of yourself so that you can actually show up for your team in the most effective way? Being the example to your team to take care of themselves, being the example to your team on how to take space and how to, be able to create these new ideas. Like, I want my team to not just be doing the things that I tell them to do. I want my team to feel the opportunity to innovate. I want them to feel like they are empowered to take ownership over certain parts of my business and all of that. And that's almost like helping create mini leaders on my team. Like, I don't want them just repeating and regurgitating what I tell them to do. I want them to be mini leaders in their own areas of expertise or their own pieces of what they're doing on my team. And in order for me to be able to really effectively show up and be able to do that, like, I have to take care of myself first. So knowing how each one of the different phases affects you and how each one of the different phases impacts how you take care of yourself and your self-care is vital and so important. So in recap, in this episode, yes, 100% your cycle in cycle syncing is totally doable and totally possible when you have a team. In fact, I think it's almost more important when you have a team because it puts you in a place of really operating as a leader, being more proactive instead of spontaneous. It allows you to have the knowledge and the self-awareness of your communication styles, your decision-making, your ability to take care of yourself and to have that really deep awareness of yourself. And that we don't need to match up every single thing in our business or every single thing in our life in order for us to feel the benefits. But when you understand yourself and you are planning ahead and you are communicating effectively and you understand how you are and where your team is and all of those types of things, those are all the magical things of having a really great team. Right? It's communication and delegation and empowerment and self-care and self-awareness and all of these things. And so if you can do that by leveraging in and listening to your cycle and tuning into your cycle, your team will forever thank you. Like, forever thank you. So with that, I will wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you have not already gone over and liked and subscribed or left a review on the podcast, please make sure to do that. If you are doing this on YouTube, which, like I said, like a new video on YouTube. I have not actually recorded a podcast on YouTube in a very long time, but go ahead and make sure that you subscribe to our show there as well. And I will see you all in the next episode.
Alrighty, friend. It was such a pleasure to hang out with you today on today's episode. I cannot wait to do it again with you next week, so save the date. We'll meet here again. Until then, if you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on the podcast letting us know what you love about this podcast. After you do that, submit a screenshot of that to support@reneefick.com, and you will be entered in to be able to have one of our free spots inside of your Cycle 101, our foundational program, letting you know the ins and the outs of how your cycle impacts you every single day. Alrighty, friend, I will see you next week.